Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday Forum. Welcome to our first Sunday Forum of the autumn 2022. Welcome back. And welcome special to Dr. Diane Millis, who is with here, our keynote speaker. Really, keynote doesn't what's above keynote? She's it. You're not just the keystone, you're the whole archway. So, thank you so much for being here. Diane has been with us over the weekend, leading us on a really amazing journey where we have explored, in essence, the vocation of listening and true, authentic, and it was a dual exercise yesterday of being intensely listening and intently speaking to one another, and how important that was. I'm going to share a little bit more about that with today, and we're so glad to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Well, here we are, and I am grateful to Jane Summers for having our round of thanks to Jane. If I'm the archway, she's the bedrock, right? Totally. And so she's provided for us what I'm going to use as an opening reflection. I like to use poetry with groups, both when I'm in a church setting and then when I'm in non-religious settings. I think poetry captivates our imagination. And our world needs our imagination. So we're going to start this morning. I'm going to be talking about stories. And we are blessed that our faith tradition, both the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition, and the Islam tradition for that matter, is a narrative. It's a beautiful story. And the deeper, I believe, the deeper we move into that story, the more insight we gain on our own stories, and vice versa. Today we're going to explore how we can live more into the stories of our lives, particularly the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Yeah, you heard that right. The story we tell ourselves about ourselves. We may not be sharing them with anyone else other than ourselves and our God. However, the deeper we can move into the awareness of God at work in our lives, the deeper we grow in intimacy with God, and I believe with one another. So that's what we're going to explore this morning. And I'd like to start with a poem by both an Irish poet and a theologian. And I think you'll see there's a lot here for us in this poem. This is by Padraig O'Toole. It's entitled Narrative Theology Number 1. And you had it on your chair, and if you don't, there are a few more here up front. So I'll invite us just to pause for a moment. Some of us have been moving a lot this morning just to get here at this time, where we've been coming from the earlier service. So let's just take a moment to pause and be grounded and centered in the beauty of this community, in this room, in this opportunity to learn more about our faith together. We've got some seats up front here. And they're not higher priced. They're the same price as those in the back.
That's what I get for being late.
That's right. Plus, I call on the people in the front door, too.
No, don't do that.
Why do you think they're sitting back there?
Narrative Theology 1. And I said to him, are there answers to all of this? And he said, the answer is in a story, and the story is being told. And I said, but there is so much pain. And she answered plainly, pain will happen. Then I said, will I ever find meaning? Do any of you ask yourself that question? Will I ever find meaning? And they said, you will find meaning where you give meaning. The answer is in a story, and the story isn't finished. I never get tired of reading this poem. I just never get tired of reading this poem. All right, well, as we explore the truth of the story of our faith, of our lives in the Lord, we know that that story is not finished. Creation is ongoing. And the same is true for each of us. I don't know about you, but there are times in my life where I felt like this story is finished for me. I'm having a hard time seeing hope. I'm having a hard time staying with faith. I may be experiencing doubts. And then I look at what the they in this poem remind us. You will find meaning where you give meaning. And so this morning, I'm going to invite us to explore how we might find greater meaning in our personal narratives through giving them meaning. So how might we do that? Do I have your attention?
Yeah.
Good. So I have the pleasure, I've been fascinated by stories my entire life, and I have the privilege through the Lilly Endowment and the grant that you all received from the Collegeville Institute to do a series of videos entitled Live Explored. We did over 20-some stories via video, people in different walks of life, even different faiths outside the Christian tradition, and to invite them to tell us how they discern God at work in their lives. And so building on that, I then had the opportunity to write a book about this whole invitation to explore the stories we're telling ourselves. So I'm quoting myself now. This might be just a little bit. And sometimes when I quote myself, I don't recognize that I wrote the words, but that's another matter. All right. Now, when I come up to you, if we're traveling, see, I'm going to pick on you now. I'm Diane. Dave, if you and I are sitting on an airplane, and let's say we end up having more time because we're delayed or whatever, you know, often what do? We're meeting somebody for the first time. Well, what's your story, Dave? And Dave might tell, well, I'm from Spokane, and I do thus and such, and oh, by the way, I'm part of this incredible congregation. If you ever visit Spokane, make sure you go visit Spokane. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? But we usually talk about what? We talk about where we're from, maybe our relational status, our family, you know, what our occupation might be, or if we're retired. That's our story, isn't it? That's our social story. All of you have one of those, don't you? All right.
Several, actually.
Several actually. Next to.
Depending on the crowd, you know.
That's right.
I played by audience.
There you go. That's right. That's why it's called narrative identity. We have different aspects of our identity. But in addition to that, we each have a story we tell ourselves about ourselves. We may not even be aware we're telling ourselves a story. Or we may be, and we don't want to listen to the story we're telling ourselves. So there are numerous adults with accomplished lives. They can tell a social story about their accomplishments. And yet, they're enacting a storyline they're not even consciously aware of participating in. A story that's been authored and imposed upon them by others. They're stuck simply because they are unaware they can write a different story from which to live and grow. One of the fascinating works of research is the work done by Dan McAdams at Northwestern University. Okay, I'm going to be academic for a moment. But this is important because he has found that in late adolescence or early adulthood, we develop a new capacity. And it's the capacity to self-author. Now, all of us as kids, and those of you that work with kids or have children of your own, know that children are marvelous storytellers. You can ask them to tell how was your day, and they may talk about playing in the sandbox, but they're going to give you a concrete, time-limited to the event story as kids. They're not going to see how that story connects into a narrative arc to make some form of coherent meaning. They may later in life remember that day in the sandbox and have a really wonderful or difficult memory. And they may see how it connects to other events. But that capacity to self-author and look at the interconnection of those events and find meaning in them, finding meaning by giving meaning to them, is actually a capacity we develop in late adolescence, early adulthood. So the thing I'm here to say today, I think for us as a church, the most important thing we can do is ask our young people to start telling us the story of their self-authoring. Invite them to give voice to their story. They may poo-poo it and think, oh, I don't have a story. But you know what? They talk about many other things. Youth that were interviewed by Chris Smith, the sociologist, about 20 years ago, they knew all kinds of things about AIDS and safe sex and don't do drugs and all that kind of stuff. And they'd be asked to rehearse that. But the researchers found very few had been asked to give voice to their faith or where they found meaning in their lives. So this is up to all of us. We're on team inviting the story and for them to begin to give voice, because we don't want to end up in our 60s. Turned 60 last month, so I'm rehearsing this new. We don't want to end up in our 60s with very limited awareness of this story. So let's invite one another to self-author. And yes, we need it to be safe. We need to hold it in confidence. There's all kinds of considerations, but we're capable of that with one another. The invitation is what's most important. I have also been so influenced by the ministry and life story of Frederick Buechner. In fact, for those of us in the Christian world, he's probably our guiding light, our archway, Edwin, for this work. And here he's reminding us, my story is important not because it is mine, God knows, although it is, but because if I tell it anything like right, the chances are you'll recognize that in many ways it is also yours. We saw that yesterday in our small groups, didn't we? That even though we may have very different lived experience, we still have commonalities in our stories. And it's precisely through these stories and all their particularity, as I have long believed and often said, that God makes himself known to each of us more powerfully and personally. If this is true, it means that to lose track of our stories is to be profoundly impoverished, not only humanly, but also spiritually. Well, let me share with you an aspect of Frederick Buechner's life. And if you've read Buechner, you know this story, because I think it's in fact, it's through the most profound wound he experienced in his life at the age of 10 that he found his vocation. So Frederick and his younger brother were up in their room playing a game. It was a Saturday, and they were intending to go to a football game with their father. And they saw their father come in, peek into their room, and then in less than minutes, their father was down, laid out on the concrete in front of the garage. He had committed suicide. So Frederick Buechner implores us to listen to our lives. And his calling has been to listen to his own. So he has, I don't know, over 20, I have to look at my own book to see what I quoted, over 20 works of fiction and nonfiction. And in some way, shape, or form, guess what? That event is in it. In the fiction stories he writes, that event is in it. In the nonfiction, he's continuing to go back to make meaning of that wound, what we now more commonly call severe trauma, right? And so out of that came to life, through that wound came to life his vocation. Now, did that happen right away? I don't think so. But does it continue to deepen? Does he continue to find more meaning in that event when he gives it meaning through his writing, through his reflection, through his preaching? Yes. Okay. So for some of us, we may have a featured wounding event like he did. This is not to suggest he had only one. I think we can read other things about, he'll write about the eating disorder that one of his daughters had. he has other, certainly, wounding events in his life. But that was the first one. And the ground just dropped out from underneath him. And so what he did over time is pray to find meaning through that. And so I do recommend his works, and I find him as a great inspiration for the work that I do. So there's a number of ways to give voice to the story we're telling ourselves about ourselves. A very common way is to think of your life as a book, and to then think about, well, how many chapters are in the story of your life? And you may start by saying, well, there are 3 big sections. There's what went before, there's the here and now, and there's what I hope for the future. And that's great. Start with those 3 big sections. And the more you reflect, the more you give meaning to your story, the more you'll find meaning. So pretty soon you may find, oh, there are 7 chapters. Maybe there's a theme for each of the decades I've lived. Or maybe it's related to very challenging events or joyful events. There's different ways we could name those chapters thematically, but that's often a common way that we begin to give voice to our story. I know for many of us, maybe telling our faith story is a way we enter into our story, and then that connects to other aspects of our lives, right? But nonetheless, usually that metaphor of a book, that's why I have the book at the beginning of the first slide, is a way we think about this. What I have found, because I've seen the power, and we explored it yesterday, the power of evocative questions, to listen more deeply to how God is at work in our lives and reflect. And so the book that I've written is based on a number of, I call them, evocative story starters or prompts. I might ask you, what's the fairy tale version of your story? And I assure you, I say, don't try to find a happy ending. It doesn't need to have a happy ending. It just invites you to think about, well, from a third-person perspective. Was there a witch in my life? Maybe there was more than one. Was I like Hansel and Gretel? Do I want to draw from an existing fairy tale? Or who might be the character if I just created my own? And so you'll read in my book, I'll talk about a king and a queen and how I was raised to be a princess. And I discovered that my calling was about a whole lot more than princess stuff, right? And so that was one of the ways of giving voice to a story that gets us out of the way we're framing it. Think about it. What would your fairy tale be? So another prompt I found very interesting, and I can't claim it as my own, is from the work of Larry Smith. You can find out more about his work at 6wordmemoirs.com. You'll get all kinds of examples. In fact, I hope you all will try this out. When I leave, promise me you'll try this out. This could be thank you so much. This could be a really fun exercise to do together. As you listen to your life, what 6 words convey your story? Now, I've also expanded this because I believe we're so increasingly visual that maybe we prefer to choose 6 pictures. Or maybe we prefer to draw or paint 6 pictures to depict our life. So I'm going to share with you now my 6 words. And my hope is not to make this all about me. As Beekner says, God knows there shouldn't be just all about my story. But my hope is through telling my story in 6 words, it will evoke thoughts about some of the words of how you might author your own story. Are we ready to give this a try? So I'm going to start with some pictures, because every time I give an assignment, I have to try it out. It's not fair of me to ask somebody else to do it if I won't do it myself. So here I am. I'm the only young person at the table, which is exactly what I loved. To be at the kids' table was not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the action with the adults as I am listening to the conversation. This is such a precious photo to me. It's the only photo, to my knowledge, I have where both my maternal and paternal grandparents are, and a very beloved great aunt and a very beloved uncle. So what does this photo, what's the word associated with this photo? The word associated with this photo is belonging. I had such a sense of belonging. I was so loved. I have these people of great faith. All of my family raised Catholic. They were deeply faithful people. They never preached about it, they just lived it. And I had this beautiful container I belonged in. I also had a Catholic school I went to and teachers and friends, and I just really felt I belonged. And that's my deep hope for all of us. That's my deep hope for all of us, is that we experience that belonging. Let me show you one more picture to give you a sense of this belonging. So if you wonder, where is Diane in this picture? She's the particular pious one. Here, look at how pious she is. There she is. And at that time in my life, I really was front and center. I was confident, I was a leader, et cetera, et cetera. I was kind of like the way I am now, but I lost that along the way. So I'll get there in a moment. So this was my community, my Catholic school, my peeps. And my dream was I was going to go on. I knew from the time I was a little girl I was called to be a teacher, and I was going to go on and teach in Catholic school. So belonging, right? 1 to age 10. The end of the summer of when I turned 10, as I was going into 5th grade, my parents informed us they would be separating. And although they tried to work it out, by Easter of that year they had divorced. By May of that year, even before I turned 11, my mother was moving us to another part of the country. So the belonging I had, very quickly, that rug of belonging pulled out, and I dropped into an unknown zone. And for many years of my life, after we moved to Phoenix, Arizona, all I remember is the Valley of the Sun. I don't remember the sun, I remember the dust. In fact, I got valley fever the first year we were there. I guess it's in the dust. My mother didn't have much money then, God bless her. She went back to work full time, raised us 3 girls. And I went to, they called it junior high then. I started junior high in 6th grade. And just, that was a very, very difficult time to go from a Catholic school and a place of belonging into a whole new region of the country. I got teased all the time about my Minnesota accent. I won't belabor the point. But it was a time of great longing from what I had lost, what it seemed had been taken from me. Now I will tell you that for many years in my life, up until the last couple of decades, I told what's referred to, Jane referred to this earlier, a contamination story. I told the story, my life's never going to be the same. My life will never be as good as those years, those first 10 years. And there's truth in that. My life was never the same. My life was never the same. When something is lost, it's lost. However, going back to our reading for the weekend, Lord, give me eyes to see. That has become my guiding prayer. Give me eyes to see again. How are you at work in this? My life won't be the same, but you are still at work in my life. You're going to make meaning of this. I'm going to find more meaning in this. I believe that. And so I moved from a contamination story of my life is never going to be as good to now a redemptive story. I believe I'm going to continue to find meaning, just as Frederick Buechner did in the rug being pulled out from underneath his life. So I don't have much time. You can read the book if you want to hear more of the specifics of the belonging to longing. I suspect some of you have these themes in your own life, so you don't necessarily need to read mine. But when I was in my early 20s and I decided to study communication studies and family studies, this was a way of me to make deeper meaning of that wounding. And then I began teaching, I began moving into ministry. Also, probably the most redemptive experience of my life was meeting my husband, Mark. And so we began to recreate what a family could be, what a marriage could be. And so I would say at least in the last 30, if not more years, I found my calling. My yearning to return to that belonging, I couldn't go back to what it was. But what I can do is I can come here to Spokane and we together can create spaces of belonging. We can sit in circles together and we can deeply listen to one another. And then in those moments, we're home again, aren't we? We're home. And so that has become my ministry out of my wounding. I don't want to make it sound like it's flipping a switch. We know it's not. But I continue, as I continue to give meaning in prayer and reflection and learn from other stories like your own, I continue to find more meaning and God being revealed in my story. So here's my last picture. It gives me so much great joy. You probably saw me yesterday. I walk around to see you in your triads. It gives me such great joy to witness people creating those spaces of belonging together. That's a great joy for me. All right, friends, so I'm going to just give us, I hope you are all holding the question about what your 6 words might be. I wish we would have time today, but I think you're also going to assure Mary that that's going to be, the 6 words is something you're going to, yeah. Thank you.
I'm not
You
even
got
at 7.
You know what? I give you permission. Let's go. That's such a theologically significant number for us. Maybe we should do 7. But what I'd like to say now is this subtitle of my book is Learning How to Tell a Life-Giving Story. And I would just like to talk about how I think of these characteristics of life-giving stories. So I see them in 3. Most of us tell thin narratives. Prime example. You ask the teens in your life, how was your day at school? When they're 7, they're going to give you a thick story. When they're 14, probably not. What are they going to say? Fine. Okay. Yeah, maybe not even a word, maybe one run to a grimace. And so that is a thin narrative. Yes? Have you told your own thin narratives? It'd be easy for me to tell a thin narrative about that experience in my life, to say, you know, that just sucked. It was awful.
I had a rough childhood.
I had a rough childhood. Thin. And so the invitation to tell life-giving stories is to go back and we thicken the narrative. This is actually the term that narrative therapists use, although we need not be trained in therapy in order to thicken our stories. And we ask ourselves, just like a good reporter would ask, the who, what, where, when, how. Get into the specifics, especially those areas and times in our life that may be thin. So I'm working right now in that period of longing. There's so much about those teen years that I still find the ache. I still find the longing. And I believe there's an invitation to go back and thicken that story even more. And so what more can be said about the who's, the what's, the where's, the when's, the how's of those events? And as importantly, I love this question. I think this is a very redemptive question. Who or what sustained you during that time? Learning, study, reading has always sustained me. That's been a sustaining activity for me. The who were teachers. I had teachers that would sit with me. I remember one teacher I read about in my first book, Miss Mosier. During lunch, she just sat with me. She could tell I was hurting. We talked only once. She sat with me. I remember her brown bag. I don't think she was trained as a counselor or therapist, but she just sat and she just listened and she just witnessed my story. She didn't try to solve or fix. She just sat. That gave me the example of why I do what I do as I teach. Because I want to be more than a content dispenser. I want to be there like Miss Mosier was, and she wasn't the only person, but my teacher sustained me. So that's how we thicken the story. We ask for more of the specifics, the who, the what's, the when, and even in the most difficult times, who or what sustained you. Yes? Is this clear? Are we already doing some thickening? On retreat, I love it when people go around, they walk around, I'm thickening. So that's my prayer for all of you. We're thickening. Okay, the second characteristic, and remember I come from Minnesota, so we have a long amount of freezing, a season of freezing. And I think the frozen aspects of our life, many of our life experiences, especially the most difficult ones, are frozen. And as a result, we're frozen with them. We're still back there. I talked at the 8:30 service in this great conversation with Pastor Lord that we can just get stuck. We can just get stuck in the past, and we become wounded wounders, actually, if we don't investigate and get into the here and now. God meets us in the here and now. God also meets us as we reflect in memory. And so we can pray through memory just like we prayed through scripture yesterday. But we get stuck in the story we were telling then. And the invitation is to flow and tell the story in the here and now about what happened then. Is this clear? So once the frozen water thaws, it flows into the here and now. And that's the invitation to each of us, is to take those frozen events, those stuck places, and allow them from here and now to flow, to look back. Those were my thoughts and feelings about what happened then. The pain I felt then of my parents' divorce and relocating is still the pain I feel now. However, the flowing story is I can see more meaning coming out of those events. Does this make sense?
It feels scary.
Oh, thank you. It is scary. It is scary. But I think, you know what? Jesus was a person of great risk, right? We're asked to do the same thing. This is a prophetic activity, I think, to take this risk, because it is scary.
I think we like being the frozen chosen.
You know what? So I think this is our prophetic invitation, isn't it? Yes, yes. We're flowing. We're living. Creation is continuing. Yes, but I agree with you. It's safer. It's easier to play it safe. I agree with you. And then finally, the third characteristic is the one we see named so eloquently by Padre Putome in this poem, which is remind ourselves and remind one another that our stories are never finished. Our stories are unfolding. So we continue, we encourage one another, keep giving meaning, and we will find our meaning. This is a promise, I believe. Like that blind man, Jesus asking, what do you want me to do for you? I want to see again. Lord, show me more meaning, even these aspects of my life that are so hard to understand. Please reveal more meaning. So this, we got the maze, because yes, it's scary, and we feel lost, and yet, I do believe there's a presence at our side, the Spirit, and I love to think some trusted companions that we can share our stories with. All right, I have a lot more here, but I think I'll just pause for a moment, because really this is enough. This is kind of the sum of the invitation, that God is at work in our lives, and to continue to quicken, to notice the flowing into the now, to reflect on the past, revisit it from the here and now, and to trust that it's unfolding. Should I pause for a moment with this? So as I said yesterday, and as so many of you experienced, a lot of us can buy books about how to tell your story. I bet some of you, there's even apps now. You can even buy programs. Maybe some of you have received them from your kids or another family member to document your life story. There's no shortage of resources available to us to invite us to tell our story. However, I firmly believe that we cannot tell our fullest, most life-giving story without a community. There's something about the power of a witness. There's something about somebody witnessing to what we've experienced. Now, for many of us, we have experienced this through therapy or counseling. But my vision for our world, and especially for our church, is that we can be those witnesses for one another. So as Buechner is saying, we learn so much from the wisdom of others' stories, the more that we're willing to enter in, to thicken those, to update those, and to be on the lookout for how they're evolving. So a dear, dear colleague of mine, we did a lot of this work with college students, actually at Luther College in Iowa. Go, my Lutheran friends. And so a dear friend of mine used to say to the students, you know, our stories are like prisms. And she'd say, when we hold our prisms up to the light and reflection you see is going to be different for each of you, right? You're going to notice a different aspect of that light refracting. And this is what we're doing when we're bringing our precious stories, when we're vulnerable and holding those up to the light. What we did yesterday, remember with the noticing, appreciating, wondering, it's from your vantage point, the light that you are seeing being revealed. And you see things, and you heard things yesterday from folks that you didn't recognize about yourself. As I said yesterday, and it bears repeating, you know, for those of us in the church, our desire is to act justly, love tenderly, right? And our wills are turning toward the good. And yet so many of us don't see the goodness and beauty in ourselves. And so to have a witness who's holding up the mirror, and I hope that was your experience yesterday in the small groups, of seeing more the goodness, the beauty, the willingness to risk and be vulnerable in one another. So I'm going to pop through this because we did some of this yesterday, and I suspect I can count on my friend that we will do more of that maybe as we do the 7-word memoirs, to try this out in a listening format and with some guidelines, a covenant with one another, so that we ensure confidentiality and trust. What I have found is that not only, and the more I learn about the story you are telling yourself about yourself, and the more I can share about the story I'm telling myself about myself, we grow in compassion both for ourselves and for others. This is what our world needs more than anything, I think, right now. And so Henry Nouwen, a very beloved Catholic priest and author, when we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives means the most to us, we often find it's those who, instead of giving advice or solutions or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. This is what we do as the body of Christ. That experience of being a little girl who the rug was pulled out under, and we all have these experiences of having the rug pulled out from under us, and we feel like Humpty Dumpty, that we've fallen off the wall and cracked into pieces. And we may just remain cracked. But I love the image of the Japanese pottery, the kintsugi, yes? Because what it helps us to see is that in those broken places, I believe that Spirit, our Lord, heals us and shows us the beauty in those broken places. Now this can seem very cliche-like. I hope you don't take it as such. But I really have found that I have far greater compassion. I look back at that little girl and I love her. I didn't love her. I didn't love her. I did want to pay attention to her. She was whining, get over it, move on. I love that little girl. She was as courageous as she could be given the circumstances she had. And so I have far more self-compassion for her. The more I've explored my story and thickened it and updated it, the more I've grown in self-compassion, the more I've grown in kindness instead of judgment, the more I've grown in a sense of this is the human condition. Wounding and breaks happen, right? So rather than being isolated, oh, this only happened to me and getting self-absorbed, I see the common humanity in this. And rather than over-identifying with being a victim of life, I can see the mindfulness of my story makes me more mindful of others. So growing self-compassion. So I'm aware of the time. Is it 10:30 we start for this workshop?
We've got 5 more minutes.
10:45 is
Oh.
when we start working.
Oh, I thought this, we've got nothing but time. This is so incredible. Yesterday, I introduced you, some of you have spent time with the wisdom of Howard Thurman as I have. And he's got a beautiful prayer in his collection. So Thurman, theologian, preacher, one of the guiding lights, most prophetic voices of the 20th century. A lot of people hear about Martin Luther King, but they don't hear enough about Howard Thurman. And so he's got a beautiful collection of prayers entitled Meditations from the Heart. And this is one of his prayers from that collection, which he named Sing a New Song. And I have taken the liberty, he's given me permission, from the other side of the veil, to adapt this to the invitation to tell a more life-giving story. So, I'll just read this to us, and if you'd like to maybe close your eyes or look along, whatever you find most meaningful. The old story of my spirit has wearied itself out. It has long ago been learned by heart. It repeats itself over and over, bringing no added joy to my day or lift to my spirit. I will tell a new story. I must learn the new story for the new needs. I must fashion new words, born of all the new growth of my life, of my mind, of my spirit. Listen to this one, everyone. I must prepare for new storylines that have never been mine before. That all that is within me may lift up my voice unto God. Therefore I shall rejoice with each new day and delight my spirit in each fresh unfolding. Can you see the last line up there? This is for all of us. I will tell this day a new story unto the Lord. So that's my hope for us. And I think our encouragement to invite one another to give voice, to create occasions to give voice to that new story. And I think through us examining our own personal story, it gives us fresh eyes to see our faith story in new ways. So I offer you that today. I'm so grateful that I've got a leader here in our midst who's I'm handing the baton to you. I know, because I'm going back to Minneapolis, but I know that you'll continue to invite one another to explore this more. So thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure to be with you. I will also, I forgot to put up my one or two books if you'd like to. There's a wonderful one by Frederick Buechner.